They say you never really know the strength of a man until you try to take away the one thing he loves most. And, for Sheriff Daniels, that one thing wasn't a mansion, or a yacht, or some fancy collectible. It was a beat-up, battle-tested Jeep that had been with him longer than most friendships survive. This wasn't just a car, it was a piece of his life story carrying the dents, scratches, and mud-stained memories of his years chasing down suspects, rescuing lost hikers, and even teaching his K-9 partner how to leap into the back seat on command. But the Florida retirement community he moved into after decades of service didn't see history, honor, or nostalgia when they looked at his Jeep. No, the HOA board, led by a woman who thrived on control, saw nothing but an eyesore that didn't fit their perfect postcard image of white fences, pastel stucco homes, and squeaky clean driveways. They wanted conformity, and they wanted power, and they thought they could use both to break a man who had spent his whole life standing unbroken. It all started with a single letter slipped into his mailbox, written in the cold, sharp tone of bureaucratic arrogance. Notice of violation, it read, informing him that his Jeep violated community aesthetic guidelines. At first, he tried the neighborly approach, walking into the next HOA meeting calm, collected, and ready to reason. He explained that the Jeep was not just a vehicle. It was legally registered, fully operational, and had been with him for over 2 decades. He told them it was a symbol of service, of sacrifice, of years when his badge meant sleepless nights and dangerous calls. But the HOA president, a sharp-eyed woman named Carol with a smile that never reached her eyes, cut him off mid-sentence. "Rules are rules, Sheriff. If we let one person slide, the whole community falls apart." Her words dripped with superiority, as if she were lecturing a child instead of a man who had kept people like her safe for decades. The board nodded along, a choir of compliance, and Daniels realized reason wasn't going to work here. They weren't interested in fairness, only control. He walked out of that meeting with his jaw clenched and a storm brewing in his chest, knowing this was about to turn into a battle of wills. The fines started piling up. Every week another notice, each one colder, more threatening, stacking like ammunition in a war they thought they were winning. Neighbors began whispering, some sympathetic, others smug. Daniels noticed the sideways glances, the murmured gossip as he walked his dog. To some, he was the stubborn old man refusing to play along, but to others he was becoming a quiet hero, standing against the HOA's iron grip. Still, the pressure was real. $5,000 wasn't pocket change, and though retirement had given him peace, it hadn't made him rich. He could feel the walls closing in, the board pushing him toward surrender. But every time he looked at that Jeep sitting in his driveway, sun-bleached paint and all, he felt his spine stiffen. That car had carried him through storms, through pursuits, through nights when he didn't know if he'd make it home. He wasn't about to betray it just because some HOA wanted a picture-perfect neighborhood. The breaking point came when Carol herself showed up at his doorstep, flanked by 2 board members, clipboards in hand. She didn't bother with pleasantries, just launched into a rehearsed speech about compliance, community standards, and consequences. Daniel stood there, silent at first, listening as his blood simmered. Then, in the kind of calm voice that only comes from years of command, he asked her a single question. "Are you sure you want to make this official?" Carol blinked, thrown off for just a second, but then smirked and said, "Absolutely." That was all he needed, because what Carol didn't know was that Daniels had been documenting everything. Every letter, every fine, every confrontation. He had it all neatly stored, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. More importantly, he had something the HOA didn't: a perfect understanding of the law. See, HOAs like to throw their weight around with vague rules and intimidating fines, but their power only holds if nobody pushes back. Daniels knew exactly how to push. He filed a formal challenge bringing the matter into court, and when the day came, he walked into that courtroom not as a man under fire but as a soldier ready to deliver justice. The HOA came in confident, their lawyer puffed up with arrogance, Carol sitting in the front row with that same thin smile. They thought this would be easy, a quick judgment in their favor. But the moment Daniels pulled out his stack of evidence, the tide turned. He laid out photos of the Jeep, documentation of its registration, and even copies of Florida statutes proving that an HOA had no authority to fine someone for a legally registered, fully functional vehicle parked in their own driveway. Then, just to twist the knife, he produced ownership records showing not only that the Jeep was his property beyond dispute, but also that the fines the HOA had levied were unlawful. The courtroom shifted. You could feel it in the air, that collective realization that the board wasn't as powerful as they wanted everyone to believe. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing as Daniels calmly, methodically dismantled the HOA's argument. Carol's face paled, her smugness evaporating as the truth settled in. The lawyer stammered, trying to salvage something, anything, but Daniels wasn't finished. In his closing, he spoke not just for himself but for every neighbor who had ever been bullied into silence. "This isn't about a Jeep," he said, his voice steady. "This is about abuse of power, and power without accountability is nothing more than tyranny." The judge nodded slowly, then delivered the hammer blow. The fines were not only voided, but the HOA was ordered to reimburse Daniels for his legal fees. In other words, they didn't just lose, they had to pay him for the privilege of trying to break him. The courtroom erupted, a low buzz of disbelief and satisfaction. Someone in the back actually clapped before the bailiff hushed them. Daniels gathered his papers, tucked them under his arm, and walked out with the quiet dignity of a man who had just won more than a case. He won his freedom. Outside, neighbors who had followed the drama online and through gossip were waiting, some grinning ear to ear, others shaking his hand, whispering thank yous. The story spread fast, fueled by the delicious irony of an HOA trying to strong-arm a sheriff and getting obliterated in court. Clips from the hearing leaked, showing Carol's shocked face, and within days it went viral. Headlines popped up. HOA tries to find sheriff. Backfires in courtroom showdown. Florida retiree turns HOA's rules against them. Sheriff's Jeep defeats HOA tyranny. Even local news picked it up, interviewing Daniels as he leaned casually against the Jeep, his loyal K9 at his side, the picture of poetic justice. But perhaps the sweetest part came later, when Carol resigned from the board under pressure from furious residents. The community had seen the truth. Their HOA wasn't protecting property values or enforcing fairness, it was feeding egos. And once that illusion broke, everything changed. Neighbors began questioning rules, pushing back, demanding transparency. Daniels never sought leadership, but he became a symbol. A reminder that sometimes you have to stand tall and take the hit to protect what matters. For him, the Jeep was more than metal and rubber. It was resilience, history, loyalty. And by defending it, he defended everyone's right to live free from petty tyranny. In the end, Daniels kept his Jeep, his dignity, and something even better, the satisfaction of watching his enemies crumble under the weight of their own arrogance. The HOA thought they could humiliate him, but instead, they made him a hero. And to this day, if you drive past that Florida retirement community, you'll see that Jeep still sitting proudly in his driveway, a quiet monument to the day one sheriff reminded everyone that real justice doesn't bow to bullies. And that, right there, is the kind of revenge that doesn't just win in court, it lives forever in the stories we tell.